Yeah, I think it was about 10 years ago that I started dabbling with R when I hit the wall with what is popular in psychology traditionally, which is SPSS. So using a GUI to run analyses, and I was trying to do custom things, and I was just hitting that wall. And gradually I started to see, well, I could just write a simple function in R and it would save a million years of headache in SPSS. So at that point I was kind of all in. But it took me a long time to kind of think through how you organize your code and how you organize your data, how you organize your functions, so that I guess what you have is a nice reproducible workflow. And another challenge I sort of counted was, when you come back to a new project and you want to start something up quickly, you've got to work out how to organize all your code and data and so on. So over the course of 10 years, this has gradually been refined. And I think all talks that I've given at the R Users group has been one or another preliminary version of how to organize your code and data in a really convenient and a nice way. And I guess this is version 3.0, and I think it's pretty nice, so I'm keen to share it. And I think, I guess getting started with a data analysis project and working out where to put your files and how to customize your settings and all that sort of thing is something pretty common to most data analysis projects. So hopefully it's useful for a few people. Can I just work out who here actually has ever used R? Yeah, okay. Oh, that's good. And well, that's good. Who has actually used ProjectTemplate? Who here, when they're running an analysis, would maybe create a folder and have one R script and put a data file in there and maybe source it and run some analyses, and is that kind of what it looks like, maybe? Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, and sometimes that's perfect. And maybe sometimes if all you're doing is you've got one data file and you're running a linear regression, maybe a data file in a single little script is fine. But, for when things grow, when you're creating a few additional functions, you've got a bunch of additional packages, you're encountering all sorts of issues, then this might be useful. So yeah, the use case here is you have one or more data sets. You need to process it, munge it, manipulate it, create some variables, delete cases, filter, transform. You've got to do some stuff to it. And then you're going to generate insights, typically through graphs and tables. Maybe some of you generate models that get exported to other places, or maybe just plain text, like the correlation between X and Y. If that's what you're interested in, then ProjectTemplate's a great tool for that. If you're trying to develop a general set of reusable functions, this is not the talk. That would be package development, and there's lots of talks about dev tools and Roxygen and ways of making R packages. But this talk is not about packages. This is about analyzing data on a specific project. Okay, so here's a sign that maybe ProjectTemplate would be good for you. Symptoms of a bad R workflow. Number one, probably the number one greatest sin you can do in R is run save. Is it save.image? I don't use it because I forget. But I think it's save.image, or when you close RStudio and asks if you want to save everything. If you click yes, that's a sin in R. That is a sin. Because you should be able to reproduce that state through your scripts. And if you can't, then who knows how you got to where you are. So the idea is to have scripts that get you the state you want. So yeah, I guess that's reproducible research. If you have library statements sort of spread all out throughout your code at different points, and therefore if someone else was to take this code, they won't know which packages it depends on, then that's probably a problem. If you're trying to, you might go a long way with your analyses, and then you give the code to someone else and you get this obscure error, something to do with factors should be numerics, or numerics should be factors, who knows. It's probably someone has a different option string as factors equals false or true. It just pervades so many default assumptions, and if you don't specify that in your code, then you can run into errors. So ProjectTemplate will make sure you make a decision about that and it's consistent. If you run some code and you write some scripts and you come back to that project 6 months later and you don't know how to get it back up to the state where you can start doing more analyses. That's a sign that you've got problems. You should be able to have one click or one line of code. It does everything, and now you're ready to go with more analyses. If it's taking you a long time to set up a new project, you kind of have some conventions. Yeah, I create a data folder and I put my data files in there, and maybe I usually put everything for sourcing libraries at the top, and maybe I source other files like that. But you kind of know it, but you kind of have to spend a lot of time remembering and recreating it. So it's kind of a quasi set of conventions. That can be messy, and it taxes your brain too much. A final issue that I encountered in the early days of R was there's a clear set of dependencies when you run analysis on data. You need to get your data into R, you need to transform it, and then you can run analyses which presumably depend on the transformed version of your data. So in my case, I might create some scale scores for personality tests or something like that. But anyway, the point is, often you get tempted to create more variables as your analysis scripts goes along. And then you have analysis scripts that happen before those variables were created, and you get into this messy space where you don't have your derived variables for certain analyses. So it's nice if you can have a clear place where data manipulations are put, so that when you analyze your data, all those kind of transformations are there. Okay. So that's what's bad. And so the aim of this talk is to introduce ProjectTemplate. This is a R package for organizing a data analysis project. And importantly, I guess my argument is that ProjectTemplate is awesome, but as soon as you start using it, you start developing a list of 10 or 15 things that you always do to this default structure to get it to where you want. So I guess my advice is, it's powerful to learn, but then you want to work out how you want to use it, and then you want to save that structure, and that's kind of your template for ongoing data analysis projects. So I'm going to show you what customizations I've done on top of it, but the main take-home message is ProjectTemplate is awesome, and once you start using it, think about how you might want to customize it. Yeah. Okay, so very quickly, just to give some, I guess, throw everyone in the deep end and sort of show you what a complete project might look like. I thought I'd quickly show you, so this was a paper that I was working on over a period of time, and just show you what a complete kind of finished, somewhat complicated but not that complicated project looks like. So this is on the OSF, so you can download all these files, and there's a little video floating around that sort of documents some of what I'm going to show today. But essentially you have, oh, hello. So here is the data analysis folder. This is a preprint of the paper, but the point is, we were generating a bunch of correlations between variables. We fit a bunch of regressions somewhere, reported the variance explained or the adjusted multiple R, and compared various things, got means of different things. So there's a bunch of variables and a bunch of analyses. And so this is kind of what the project template structure looks like in abbreviated form and tailored a bit to mine. The main thing I want you to take away at this point is just to get a feel for what I mean by project template. I'll go through all the details in a bit. So I have, I'll just open it up in our studio. Hopefully this is vaguely readable. So you've got a bunch of standardized files and folders. So for example, we have a configuration file. So this is where you would list all the packages you need for the project, and quite commonly you'll have a standard set, and then as the project evolves you add 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 more. You also specify strings as factors, so every time anyone runs this code, regardless of what their default is, that will be whatever you've set it to be, and there's a bunch of other things you can play with.
Sorry, is that just a text file that you edit as you go along to add stuff to?
Yeah. So it's just an alternative way of storing all the packages you need, and there's there's a bunch of configuration options. And I'll go through all that kind of detail in a bit, but just to say that there's a standard place to put your configurations.
What does DCS stand for?
I think it's a file format, but I don't know much about it. I guess it's kind of variable name :value.
Right.
So I assume it's some sort of standardized format. It opens fine in RStudio. If you're on Windows, yeah.
Are these libraries pre-built, or is it you design it yourself?
These packages. So other than this one, which is my one, which is on GitHub, everything else is on CRAN or CRAN. So yeah, it will.
What does yours do?
It.
Is it available?
We'll schedule another two.
Yeah, it allows you to compare the variance explained or the adjusted R squared of different regression models, and it's particularly useful if you want to get confidence intervals on a regression equation with many predictors and one with small numbers, which is important when you're predicting things like job performance from models of personality with a few predictors and many predictors. So sort of answers the question, do we need 30 different personality variables, or is 5 enough?
Is it available?
Yeah, it's on GitHub. Just so it just won't auto download with this package because you need to do a manual step.
So does that as factors true or false? Does that like change the defaults for every library you?
Anything that uses the default. So I think things like read.csv and a bunch of data import functions use that option.
Yeah.
And a lot of people use read.csv to import their files. So it's an important. It changes the default option.
For all the libraries you use, more or less.
Yeah, anything that uses the R option, if that makes sense. I think the Hadley verse uses false. It doesn't look at the R option. It's always false in an attempt to overcome this. Yeah, so you've got some configuration stuff. We've got some data files. I've just exported it into R data format for reproducibility, but it could be SPSS files, CSVs. We'll get into that later. I've got a bunch of additional functions in this lib folder that do all sorts of things that I've decided I needed. And yeah, in the munge folder.
So are they literally just individual functions that you saved as files?
Let's have a look. Bunch of functions in a file that do a bunch of little random things, not big enough to be a package, but just, oh yeah, I need this and I'll probably use it more than once. And sometimes at the start of a project, I'll throw something in from a previous project because it might be useful. So I'll just show you the whole shebang. This is meant to be just a heads up before I explain the details, but anyway, whatever. So at the start of each project, this is what kind of runs it all. It loads the project template library and loads the project. And so it goes through a bunch of things. It goes through those settings. It loads the packages. It loads the data. It imports those support libraries, anything in the lib folder. It runs any pre-processing, which I've got to score the test and do a bunch of things. And then you're good to go. And then, you can put all your analyses which depend on that. So for me, that's like things like factor analyses and I don't know if that's going to work, plots and so on. Anyway, this is just a whirlwind overview. I've got slides. The point is that, that's sort of the gist of it. It's a way of organizing your files and folders so that you can have everything in its nice place. Okay, so where is it and how do you get it? Well, there's a website that talks about it, and there's some reasonable documentation there. It's been around for quite a long time. I think when I gave my talk 5 or 6 years ago, I was trying to find something like this, I think, and it stumbled on something a little bit similar, but they thought it through better than I could. So yeah, John Miles White has done a lot of good things in the R world and other languages. But yeah, there's an active support team. So as I said, the benefits of it is that it encourages a good workflow. So you saw the step, you configure things, you load your packages, you load your support files, load data, manipulate it, and then you're ready to analyze it. So that's, maybe we all sort of stumble on that sequence, but it really encourages that. Also, by having a standardized set of locations to store your files, it's much easier to come back to projects and know where things are, to know what each file does and where things might be. And that really builds if you run, if you're running a different project every month or every week or whatever, then it's really great. It also automatically loads data files based on the file extension, which usually does what you need. So it'll load a CSV, it'll load SPSS, it'll load Excel, it'll load XLSS and XLSX, and it'll load all sorts of file database formats. And you don't have to be Googling, how do I import a CSV? Or maybe you remember that one by heart, but how do you import something more obscure? It will just do.
Does it have version control abilities or?
No, it's orthogonal to that. So yeah, by all means, have version control. But you could add it, and yeah, you probably add it, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. As I said, if you want to create a new project using the standard project template approach, you just load project template and run create.project, and you give it a name. And what that will do is it will generate a set of directories that do a whole bunch of things, only a few of which are kind of fundamental to project template. But yes. And then you've got the settings you can specify. As I said, any data is...
Just create the base directory and whatever your work directory is at the time you run that function.
Yeah, so it'll add that folder, say my project, or in this case it was called letters, to wherever your working directory is. Yeah, and then you can start using it, I suppose. So yeah, this was my, I guess, attempt to explain what I was going through a bit quickly before in more detail. As I say, when you start a project, you start adding additional packages. They just get added in this this global.dcf file. So that's just it's an easy way for you to look. Another nice feature is if you give it to someone else, I think it's nice. It's a little bit scary from a security concept, but it will auto-install anything on CRAN. So if they don't have a particular package, it'll auto-install it and load it. So that's kind of nice. And yeah, there's a bunch of other settings. In particular, you can control whether, for a given run, whether you run the data manipulation step or load the libraries. You can sort of control what gets run when you load the project. Hi.
When you say auto installs packages, will it install the latest package on CRAN, or will it install the package version that you're using on your
Latest version on CRAN.
latest version?
So yeah, I don't know, I haven't really looked at things like PackRat and the other kind of whatever, but yeah.
But will you be able to? This question because I had a problem sometimes that if I update a particular package, then I have to reinstall it, or it doesn't work, so I need to kind of install. So PackRat is good in terms of if you want to use an old package, an old version. Is there a way here, for instance, to specify the version of the package, or?
No, I don't think there's a way of specifying the version. I mean, you could omit the package here and just do your PackRat thing however you normally do it, I guess. But it's not something built into the process. Yeah, so the lib directory is kind of useful, I guess, in the sense that if you're generating little R scripts that are kind of functions, in case you evolve a project, you sometimes put something in a function and you want to reuse it in more than one place, then you just put it in an R file, and then if you're doing it in real time, you might just source that one file, but if you then come back to the project, that file is automatically sourced. So you don't have to remember to include source lib that particular file, say in the top of your R script. It just happens automatically. As I say, the auto import of data is quite nice. You have to basically, it will take if you call your file mydata.csv and you put it in the data folder and then you run load project, you'll get a file called mydata, or an object in your workspace called mydata. So you don't have to remember read.csv and the settings. It will kind of use usually pretty good defaults of whatever options there are. I mean, you can override it, obviously, by putting your own stuff in, but if there's particular settings. But most of the time, you can plonk things in. You know, I sometimes, I know it sounds a bit dirty having data in Excel, but I sometimes will just have little tables in Excel with ad hoc information, and I'll have like 10 sheets. And it's a convenient place to store this little ad hoc sort of data for, often it's like personality tests and the items and how they're scored. So that can be quite nice. You know, it'll just auto import all 10 worksheets with file name.sheet name. Yeah, lots of file formats supported. Yeah, I mean, the munge directory is all for data manipulation. So you could have one or more munge files. They run usually, I think, in the sequence of their file name. So if you have 01, munge, 02, munge, etc. Yeah, so that's really good in the sense that all that gets run in one go before you get to analysis. So it's nice that it forces you to put all that stuff in one place. So that's the kind of things you might be doing there. Yeah. So as I say, once you've kind of got your packages, got it all ready, you simply have to include this one line of code, or I guess it's kind of 2 lines, but I usually put it on 1 line with a semicolon, just because it feels nice. You run that 1 line, and that will kind of get you up and running with your analyses. So that 1 line would be placed at the top of, say, an R Markdown file or the analysis script, the thing where you're going to be creating tables and graphs and text and models or whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah. So I think that's probably nice. No more save.image. Everything's reproducible. Okay, so that's Project Template in its traditional form. And I started using it and I liked it. And for the first 5 projects, I'd run Project Template and then I'd realize, oh, I want to add this, 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 and I want to have string as fact as false, and I want to have these 3 libraries and not those libraries, and I want to have these files always. And so pretty quickly you start realizing, hang on, is there a way that I can just have my version and get up and running on a new project straight away? So yeah, that's what this is sort of talking about. So that's essentially what I've done. I'll talk about the little tweaks I've made, but the point is that if you give Project Template a go, you'll probably find your own tweaks. There may be a couple of these tweaks you'll kind of like and you might want to incorporate. I then save it on GitHub, but I guess you could have a zip file anywhere on your computer or whatever. So I literally just, go to Google and, oh, you can't see that. I literally just have a little shortcut, which is the zip file to my GitHub repository, which has a copy of this project template, and that will download the zip file, unzip it, and away we go. I'm not sure if I'm internet connected, but that's the idea. But the point is you have some copy of the project template that's adapted to your needs.
Is there a nice way to do that? Could you have like something in your home directory that you can call with that function? You know, like create project.
Yeah, like you're in R and you do it. Yeah. I thought about that. Because I do like to save 1 or more steps. But I still think this saves me fewer steps because I'm usually not in the home directory. I'm in the home directory in Finder or Explorer. So if I'll just download it and
But it would look in that, like how you have .emacs folder, you could have like a .project template.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, as you like, probably. I mean, it would just be a matter of copying and unzipping something, I think. Or,
Yeah, right.
Okay. So, yeah, in terms of these, I guess there's a handful of customizations which I found useful. I don't know whether they align with other people's kind of things, but the first was everyone has a list of packages which they're kind of always using, and some of the defaults that they recommend I don't use. So that was the first thing I did. I sort of changed that config file and put in, I'll use ggplot2, the psych package for me. Asfact is false, I like that. Another really cool thing I found was to add an RStudio project file. I don't know if people use RStudio, but having an RStudio project file meant that as soon as I unzip this package, I can just double click on a file and it opens in the working directory. It's good to go. So that was good. Yeah, I usually do my substantive analyses in R Markdown. I find it quite nice to work with, to have little code chunks for different tables and figures and stuff. So I added one of them that included the little script to source ProjectTemplate. I didn't find that ProjectTemplate had any kind of default output folder. I'm always generating tables and figures and everything. So they have a figures folder, but that never felt quite right. So I renamed it output so I can always throw the output of my analyses to a standard folder, and I always know the name. I often found that when I was doing the data manipulation steps and debugging it, it was really important to be able to load the file without applying the existing data manipulation scripts. So I wanted to get the analysis where it's imported things, config, libs, but not having done the data manipulation. So this one-liner I put at the top of my data manipulation script, and it basically loads the project but skips the data manipulation step. So I found that was a very common use case for me. I also found that I often wanted to prepare my data just a little bit before I put it in the data folder. It's often nice if the data in the data folder at least has the right names. So if you're doing things like changing the case of variable names or radically altering the structure of stuff, I often like to kind of do that first. So, anyway. Yeah, and I find conventions evolve over time. You discover something that you're always using, and then you kind of add it to the broader project. So yeah, the basic workflow is pretty straightforward. You download the zip file, unzip it, name the folder in the project file to your whatever it is you're going to call it. Add any little scripts, add your data, and start preparing it, and away you go, and you can start analyzing. That's kind of what it looks like. So yeah, I'll just show you really quickly what that looks like from scratch. So what I've got here, okay, let's see. Okay, so what I've got here, I've downloaded my zip file that's been customized over the while. And once again, I'm not advocating like my zip file is the ultimate zip file. It's the ultimate zip file for me, but you'll if you use it, you'll come up with your own version, right? And then what we've got here is a data set that looks at some California schools data. I found it on some econometrics textbook. It's got like 1,000 California schools and student performance and how many are on food stamps and things like that. So say we wanted to analyze it, maybe create some additional variables. What would that look like? So I download the zip file, unzip it, give the project a name, give the RStudio project a name, CAS or California Schools. I take the data file, this is an SPSS file if anyone's interested, and put it in the data folder. Okay, we open up the RStudio project. And in theory, we've got this Markdown file, which I could just run load.project, ProjectTemplate, blah, blah. And it has loaded CAS, California Schools, and you could have a look at CAS and see that it's got income and English and reading and maths and so on. So it does do the auto loading, which is nice. Obviously, you could add, different things. Let's say we wanted to create some new variables. we would go to the munge file and say, I mean, one thing you can do with this data file is create an overall performance measure of, say, like this is like the school reading average, this is the math average. So we could create a variable like, performance, if we wanted to kind of aggregate that. CAS read plus CAS math. And another variable, I was looking at this the other day and thinking, oh, that you've got number of students, you've got number of teachers. And they're very highly correlated. It's not surprising. Any school with a lot of students is going to have a lot of teachers. But maybe we could get at something more meaningful, like staff-student ratio. So let's create that. Go staff-student ratio, or maybe it's student-staff ratio. I don't know, but whatever. And so maybe that variable would be more interesting. So anyway, I have created these variables and I could obviously use them at this point. But let's imagine I was coming back to this project after a break. There's nothing in my workspace at all. No CAS. But now if I load project template, hopefully we will have staff-student ratio that wasn't there before. And so, we could run a regression or something predicting performance from staff-student ratio. So so the idea is, there's all the analyses, and you could output that, and so on.
Does that mean we should just have, who cares? Just have huge classes.
Well, what was the correlation? I think it was like a 0.2 correlation. I mean, I think if we put in income, things get a little bit more scary. Yeah, 50%. So it's mostly like, all the kind of poverty-related income, food stamps-y things. But so there's lots of other variables. So I wasn't hoping to make a substantive about inequality in schools. But the data set's quite interesting. It's floating around. My main point was just to say, that's just a very quick overview of how it works, and you can sort of get a feel for things. And so,
on this, just on the question of big data, if you're working with data sets that are like a gigabyte or so and take several minutes to process,
so it does have cache. Yeah, it does have caching options. So if you're doing lots of data processing, so because I guess
you don't want to
it can still take a long time to load into memory a big data set, right?
Yeah.
But
you don't want to rerun your munging script every time you make it. I think you can just run if you set the cache thing. I don't use it generally. Most of my stuff, there's a cache folder, and I think if you set cache loading to true, it won't run data. So I'm not that experienced, but it will look at the age of the data and the age of the derived data in the cache folder or something like that. Maybe it must look at the age of the munge file, I guess, wouldn't it? To see if the munge file's newer than the data, then it probably has to rerun it. But if it's not, then it can probably leave it, I think. Yeah.
Do you find with the very large data sets that sometimes just sampling the data and cheating gets you to the results?
Maybe that's for someone else. I mean, my biggest data set might be a million rows and 20 variables. It's not. It's not. Yeah, most of the time it's not a problem. But I'm sure other people have cases where that's a good idea.
Just with your earlier comment about doing a bit of pre-work on your data.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a bit of a pre-munging file?
Yeah, I put it in
does that kind of fit in your
workflow? I usually put it in this this raw data just to standardize it. So like
in particular, I really like the variable names to be final when it goes into data. So I'll often make everything lowercase so I don't have to think about case, because I hate having to think about the case of variable names. And sometimes people will supply me variables or data files with awful variable names. Like you might have a survey with 300 items and it's just Q1 to Q300, and I want them to vaguely represent what they are.
Classic case is something I have today where you're importing a few thousand CSV files into a data frame and you want to check them first and maybe make some changes to a few that have one more column or something before.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I put it. And also this also links to, I mean, I'm an academic, so I often want to share this with the world, but I don't want to share like every nitty-gritty detail, and sometimes there's like demographics I can't share, or so yeah, that sort of like try and keep some, that also influences my workflow, so I can sort of isolate things that I can share and things that I can't share.
But you still want that to be reproducible. You still want
that's right.
From the client to.
Yeah, so I often put and then they'll have the raw file names, and I'll have a little script there that does that and maybe exports a final file to the data folder or something. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the gist of it.
That global DCF file, why didn't you save that as a set of assigned variables in an R file?
Because that's just exactly what ProjectTemplate requires. So it cannot be anything else. Yeah, that's just their file format for configuration settings. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it is worth thinking about the pros and cons of this approach. And I guess when I presented a workshop on this to some PhD students, I guess their comment was, well, if I'm sharing something with my supervisor or whoever is not familiar with ProjectTemplate, there is a little bit of a communication thing. A few things are perhaps done a little bit differently about how options are specified. You know, you're not going to see the standard list of library statements at the top of your R script, and data loading kind of just happens, you know, auto-magically. So people may be wondering, where did this data file come from? So there's a little bit of that. I usually get around that by having a README file that explains that to people. And that said, I don't think anybody's R workflow is that intuitive. There's always going to be a little bit of explanation. And then more generally, I guess we've all got something that works, and this works quite well for me. But there's a little bit of a startup cost in adopting any workflow, especially someone else's. Yeah, it creates one more dependency on ProjectTemplate and the particular data loading functions it uses and a few things like that, but I've found it to be quite stable. So yeah, that hasn't been too much of a problem. So yeah, I think it's a great tool, even if it's just helping yourself in the future. It's a nice framework for reproducible research, and I think my main message is, if you like it, if you can customize it and add the things you need, then that's when it gets really cool. So yeah, happy to answer questions or whatever. Yeah.
If you're working with non-R data analysis tools such as SQL and Stan and Python, is there a way to integrate that code into your projects?
So I guess I haven't used Stan so much, but I use JAGs, which is basically the same thing. You might have like scripts written in another language. I mean, this is only like really to get you up and running with the analysis. You can still have extra folders with, you know, your Stan code or whatever. It's sort of like, it's a very open framework where...
Right, I guess what I'm getting at is if you've got a JAGs model, is ProjectTemplate gonna like still fit the model and keep everything reproducible?
Yeah, there's nothing special about ProjectTemplate. I mean, I've written a couple of papers using, you know, Bayesian models where we use external JAG scripts, and yeah, I mean, in that case, I'm often creating lots of support functions as I have layer upon layer of sort of encapsulating the JAGs code or having scripts that write JAGs code. So it's nothing you might end up creating a new folder to store that or source it, but there's nothing. Yeah, I mean.
Actually, along those lines, I noticed in your data folder before, when you were bringing all the data sets, you actually had an SQL file in there. What was that doing?
Did I have an SQL file?
Yeah.
Really?
No, sorry, you didn't have an SQL
You can.
file. It had a list
That's a
of
supported file format.
Of file formats, yeah.
Yeah.
SQL in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've never used it, but I believe certain file formats are literally just like some sort of command or statement or something like that. The help file will talk to you about how they work, but I think some of the database formats are literally like the connection string or something like that. Probably a plain text file with some sort of connection string, but I haven't. Being a psychology researcher, we have our own little data sets, and that's what we analyze. And it's less connecting with business databases and so on. But it definitely does have support for databases. But yeah, yeah.
So if you're customizing the package, the template package, are you then checking if it's being changed in CRAN? Are you checking for changes? Then you have to merge your changes with their changes.
I mean, occasionally I have to run, like they have this migrate.project when they update a version, but I mean, there really isn't. The main things that might change is they add a few data import options, or that config file gets updated with maybe an extra setting. But yeah. It's really like, yeah. The only time I've had to write migrate.project, and then it adds an extra configuration setting to an existing project, but it still runs.
So it takes your configured version.
Yeah, it takes my config file, and maybe at some point they added an extra option. Like, I think they added an option where maybe it auto installs the packages, or it might have added an option to not just load files in the data directory, but also go to subfolders. That really doesn't break stuff, as far as I can tell. The only, slightly scary thing would be if they decided to change their data loading function. So, like, at one point I was suggesting maybe they should use the read XL package to load Excel files, because it removes the dependencies on having to have Java or Perl installed and stuff. So that would have been kind of cool. And then I started looking into it and I realized, oh, the read.xl function imports Excel files in a slightly different way. And that's going to break my old projects, because it's going to make Boolean into numbers. There's a really minor kind of thing. But yeah, I guess there's that vague risk. But
don't you always want to use comments within a file?
Well, that was a good prod. So now, whenever I kind of create a repository based on it's like a piece of scientific research I'm going to upload, I actually, like, I might have SPSS or Excel or whatever files from my own stuff, but then when I export it, I kind of do this little export thing where it just goes to R data, because I'll know that'll always be.
The first thing you should do is get it out of Excel and SPSS into a plain text.
I don't know if CSV is that reproducible. I mean, anyone who accidentally opens up an Excel file can sometimes. I have this issue of, I have this values, it's a measure of personal values, and the variable name, one of the variable names is, I think, SEP1. If you open that in Excel, you get a date for the variable name. But I don't know, maybe I'm being cynical about CSVs, but there's a lot of options about typing in CSV, so I don't know if CSVs are. Well, there you go. I don't know much about SQL databases, so.
On the project management side of things, could you extend, how easy would it be to extend your template to support things like code coverage, or have a checklist of things you should do before it's project finished?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few things that I haven't discussed on ProjectTemplate that they seem to be going into, and they have a test folder, and I've never used that, but that's supposedly a place where you put the tests for your code or something like that. And they do have logging features and a few other things which I haven't used, and I'm not quite sure how developed it is. So I don't know if that would link into what you're talking about. I mean, I think there's the message here about ProjectTemplate, but I guess the other message is if you have some standardized pack, like a set of folders and files and stuff, and that's what you do in either your work or your company, then that's got to be a good thing, I think, in terms of it being tailored and
Because
so
I
on.
definitely want everything reproducible is the main takeaway.
Yeah, definitely reproducible and being quick, so you can start up a new project and it's ready to go rather than faffing about where things go.
Like, just talking about packages again, presumably, you know, you've got all the packages that it requests on your loaded already on your computer, saved or whatever. So it doesn't then go and try and download the latest one or anything, it just opens up the one.
No, if you have it, it will load it, and if you don't have it, it will see whether it's on CRAN. And if it's on CRAN, it will download it.
I'm assuming you could put something in the configuration to update packages or something like that if you wanted to automatically.
Yeah.
If you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can still do everything you can do with R, just...
Sorry, one other one then. So when you're loading CSVs, sometimes I find it's easier just to tell it to load everything in as a character, and then I can decide later on what to actually do with it, rather than letting it guess. Can you do that, or will it automatically use whatever its default is, and you can't change that? It's auto-load.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a little script in the lib file called data import override. So basically, anything if you don't like the way they do it, if you load a data file that would have the same name, so if I loaded a file called input into the workspace, it would not look at input. I think that's right.
Oh, so you feed it to it, so I can load that into you.
Yeah, so that's one way of, if you need to, yeah. So I guess the defaults are relatively intelligent, but it's not going to deal with every edge case.
This is probably a really inappropriate question. But how does R store data internally when it's working on it, just as a giant list? Or is it...
Well, I mean, it's a data frame is the name of the object, so I guess it's a list of vectors that are constrained to be a certain length.
Size?
I don't know if there's a limit on the size of a data frame. Maybe your
Can
memory.
it be reading from a file and processing data and then reading and uploading it and processing it?
By default, it prefers to work in memory. There are a few packages out there that will allow you to access a data set from disk, but that's a bit different,
example,
right?
Like the most boring, obvious thing you might want to do for a big, very long string of data is calculate the average. Does R automatically, like, say, read 100,000 points of data, calculate the average, then erase that from memory, read the next 100,000, calculate the average? No.
Keep to the memory.
R has to load the whole thing.
And you can delete it from memory.
I'm sure there's packages that'll not load the entire thing in memory.
You can run a loop and basically take each chunk of the file and just write a particular number of lines, and then eventually compute the average.
Yeah, but you'd have to do that by hand.
Yeah. Read that sounds good.
Yeah.
You'd have to write the program to do that. R doesn't automatically do that.
Packages that will do that.
The packages.
But yeah, I mean, I guess if you've got 50 or 100 million rows, then I guess you'd be hitting that kind of issue. If you've got 1 million rows or 2 million rows or 4 million rows, then you're probably all right.
Jeremy, I might have misunderstood things. The example you've given is, you've driven it by here's a complete project that I've done. I'm imagining that the conceptual model was here's an analysis, so you'll iteratively develop your analytic stuff. I've kind of got the impression that the assumption is that the munging stuff you can sort of more or less just dash off without having to go away and do any analyses to perhaps support the development of the munging. But the kind of data sets I get tend to be from clients who have absolutely no idea what's in their data. So typical project for me is about 3 or 4 projects worth of trying to understand what's in the data set before you can actually do the analysis. I'm just wondering whether the sort of the pre-built structure for ProjectTemplate might actually get in the way of trying to do that. Because essentially I have initially completely unmunged data set, a bunch of analyses which tell me how to partially munge it, and then another complete project to tell me how to munge it a bit more.
Otherwise, if you put it in one block, you're just commenting the hell out of everything and trying to refer back to
and so in order to be able to reproduce it, you want to be able to keep all those steps of how you arrived at what the hell the data actually was formatted as. So it's sort of like having 5 separate projects and wanting to keep all the data sets from them at the same thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I could see it could get messy. I mean, I often will have there are a lot of analyses that get run that aren't the paper analyses, if you know. So I'll often have an extra R Markdown file, which is just me playing around and exploring, testing assumptions. And when I'm writing a munge file, there's a lot of things that you look at, right? Like, oh yeah, is this variable right? The number of cases right? What's the missing data like? So yeah, I mean that's maybe most of the time for me that's often throwaway. But yeah, I can see why if you got really messy and you're really trying to.
I thought of the same thing from another perspective. If you're trying to munge data and then have it while you're building the model, one eye on actually productionizing and munging the pre-processing you have to do for the scoring part of it, then that could you'd be having to refer back to a separate file sitting there to remember what you did to then try and put in the processing steps for munging it for live scoring. So I understand where you're coming from, but it does introduce another way of having to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess along the way I'll often realize that I'm going to need a variable in more than one code block, and then that gets copied and pasted into that directory in its right sequential kind of spot.
And I mean, do you often get memory errors while you're working? Is that an everyday occurrence, like, oh no, memory error?
Like running out of memory in R?
Yeah.
Not for me. I mean, yeah, but I mean, the longest I had a data file with 240,000 rows and maybe 700 variables, and that was taking 10 minutes to load. That was a pain. That was like this big longitudinal stack.
Memory errors at that point?
Potentially, but yeah, I mean, this is a 16 gig laptop. It's not huge, but But I mean, if you've got massive data, then then there's all sorts of questions about R.
There are libraries that are designed to help you with that already.
I can send you an article on how can handle the larger data sets.
That would be interesting.
Shut down the Chrome tab as well.
Have you thought of so just previous topic, if you had if you categorize all your different analyses into there's 5 categories of analysis. That one looks like this, that one looks like that. So then configure your package 5 different template packages for category A, category B, blah, blah, blah. And then just invoke the one that you need for that. And it has its own set of munging steps.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be really nice. I mean, for me, it still seems to fall into one. I think, I think, but that's an interesting question. Yeah,
so you've got one, the one you configured once.
Just once, and it always seems to be there's some raw data, there's a few data files. Yeah, I mean, and I guess then I'll just copy and paste things from other projects, but
If you got too many, you're going back to the original problem.
Yeah, but I imagine in industry there must be kind of very different categories of problems. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess because it's a vastly different project every time, it's really hard to make things complete actually does what you want. But you want to automate the whole thing. No, but from a data munging point of view, going from raw data to data you can then analyze. You're saying that you might take 5 steps to get to the point just to understand what's in it. Well, it's going to be pretty, I would imagine, hard to write a template. And to do that, there must be a limitation to how
Yeah.
So when this thing, becomes, you spend all your time creating new versions of this project template or this new step you've just discovered. It's probably not really the right tool for that kind of.
The structure is mostly related to the kinds of things you're going to create along the way. But as long as the project template is fairly blind to what's actually in those, I think you can probably go fairly well.
But the data cleaning is always going to be labour intensive. That can't be automated.
But I think that you're suggesting that it is essentially you've got this data munging, this code does X to the data. Isn't that what you have?
Well, it's more the abstraction that there is data munging, and let's put it in a given place. I mean, it still takes hours to do the data munging and write all that stuff, and it still takes hours to analyze data. But at least you know where that stuff will be, and yeah, so it's abstracting the concept, but and where we'll put that code and the sequence.
It's always going to be labour intensive.
Yeah. It's still like data analysis still work. It's just hoping
the cleaning of the data, the preparation of the data so that it's in a format that you can even read it into R, which is not going to be the format that you're necessarily going to receive the data in. That's a step.
Yeah.
It can't really be automated.
Yeah.
I don't think it can be.
No, I mean, I think, like that's, I guess, my concept of the raw data folders is where we get that sort of stuff sorted out.
Jeremy, I'm interested in your perspective as the pros and cons of managing these things as an R Studio project versus standing alone. What do you think is so good about managing things as an R Studio project?
Well, I can double click on that file and I'm in the right working directory.
Right.
I like RStudio. I like code completion. I like
I love RStudio.
Vim key binding.
Manage things as a RStudio project.
Specifically. The main thing is double clicking on it. It'll open up in the right working directory in RStudio. Probably remember the files that were open last time.
Yeah.
I think I may have even ensured that the project file does not ask me to save .image. So I think that might be hardwired into the R project file. I have to double check that.
You might set that as a default.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, no, it's just one click and you're in the right space.
One of the things, if you want to use get to SVN version control, then you need to use an R project. So
That's a good point.
how you want to do version control.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the integration is nice in it.
I just get outside that.
Yeah.
I also like it's got kind of your history of your last 5 or however many open projects in the top right. So if you're flicking between jobs, you can very quickly just go open that project again.
Yeah.
Where you were 2 days ago.
All the files are there, the working
exactly.
directory.
Do we have any more questions? I think we'll